friends, and welcome to Valor, Strength of Mind. Today, I want to talk to you about healthy versus toxic relationships and how trauma actually makes us more likely or susceptible to fall into an unhealthy or toxic relationship. So let's start by really understanding what is a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship is a mutual understanding between two people and is based on love, support, encouragement, and respect. So what are the characteristics of healthy relationships? One is support. People in healthy relationships support and encourage one another. They genuinely want their partner to become the best versions of themselves and do everything to support them so that they can reach their goals, and vice versa. Trait number two is acceptance. People in healthy relationships accept one another. They understand that perfection is not real, and they accept and embrace differences between them and their partners. People in healthy relationships also have open communication. They are able to be direct with what they need, what they feel, and what they think. And this helps eliminate a lot of misconceptions or a lot of problems in the relationship long term. People in healthy relationships also have healthy boundaries. And what that means is that as much as they love to spend time with one another, they also make time for themselves, for their friendships, and for their family outside of being with their partner. Because they understand that this is something very healthy in becoming a better partner and being able to keep your social life. People in healthy relationships also feel safe to be who they are, to express their thoughts, their feelings, and their desires, and also to come or turn to that person when they're going through something difficult, because they know that they will be embraced with acceptance and love rather than criticism and humiliation or being hurt in any manner, shape, or form. Another trait of a healthy relationship is trust. Many people in healthy relationships understand that the relationship is a mutual respect, meaning that they have no problem if their partner goes out with their friends or goes out with their families without them, because they know that their partner will respect them and do not feel insecure that something will go wrong. They have a huge sense of security and trust in the relationship that they have with one another. And lastly, people in healthy relationships also are equal. In healthy relationships, there is no such thing as a dominant or a submissive one. People in healthy relationships understand that equality is important and that each partner's needs are just as important and need to be met. Now, on the flip side of that, there's something called toxic relationships. And toxic relationships are relationships that end up making us feel unworthy, unloved, and that can affect our emotional and mental well-being in a very negative way. Some of the characteristics of an unhealthy relationship include insecurity, discouragement, criticism, inequality, fear, poor boundaries, and a lack of communication. Characteristics or traits of an unhealthy or toxic relationship include insecurity. Insecurity means that people in these relationships do not trust each other. Typically, they'll be afraid of being abandoned or the partner being unfaithful, so they try to control the situation and be overly jealous, clingy, or controlling of the relationship. Another trait includes discouragement. Oftentimes, people in unhealthy or toxic relationships find that their partners do not want them to advance or succeed. And the reason for that is that there is a great sense of fear that if the person reaches their goals or their dreams, they will move on and leave the partner. And therefore, a lot of times when you express your dreams or your hopes to your partner, if you are in an unhealthy or toxic relationship, you will find that they will say, "You can't do it, that's a crazy idea, oh come on," or they'll laugh at your dreams. And this is just a form of manipulation because they want to discourage you from advancing. Another trait of unhealthy or toxic relationships include inequality. In an unhealthy or toxic relationship, typically one person feels that they have to be dominant and that the other one has to be submissive. And what they do is that they expect the person that is submissive to place their wants, their needs, and their desires aside, all to meet the expectations and the wants of the person who is dominant. Now, this is unhealthy because what ends up happening is that it leaves the person who is submissive feeling unworthy of love, and it makes them feel like they are not important. Another trait of unhealthy relationships or toxic relationship is poor communication. People in toxic relationships will oftentimes be aggressive verbally, such as using bad words or saying words that are very hurtful. They would utilize sarcasm or sometimes completely shut down and give you the silent treatment, all as a way of trying to control the situation because they don't know how to communicate effectively. Criticism is another trait of a toxic relationship. Criticism is very harmful to an individual because it makes them feel unworthy and it makes them feel like they are not enough. People in toxic relationships will find that oftentimes their partner will treat them with a lot of criticism and will make them feel inferior. And lastly, the other characteristic of a toxic relationship is fear. You are afraid to be yourself, to express your thoughts and your needs in front of your partner because you are afraid that you're going to be received with some sort of abuse, whether that's physical, emotional, or psychological. This is what makes a relationship very toxic because we should never feel afraid to express our thoughts or our feelings to our partner. And typically in a healthy relationship, that is not the case. But in an unhealthy or toxic relationship, there is the constant fear of being judged or hurt in some manner, shape, or form in the relationship. Now you may be asking yourself, well, if healthy relationships are so great and toxic relationships are so bad, why are people engaging in toxic relationships? And this is where it's so important to understand trauma. Trauma actually makes us more susceptible or more likely to engage in an unhealthy or a toxic relationship. So let me explain how this works. As I mentioned last week, our relationships begin with healthy attachment. And a lot of times what happens is that when we are children, if we have a parent who is abusive or a parent who is emotionally unavailable or neglectful, then what ends up happening is that we develop something called an unhealthy attachment. And what that means is that unhealthy attachments leaves us feeling unworthy or distrustful of people. So as we continue to grow up, we seek acceptance and validation, and oftentimes we seek it from the wrong type of individuals. A great example of this is something called trauma bonding. And what trauma bonding is was a term that was defined by Dr. Patrick Carnes, and he explains that when people grow up in trauma, they develop this cycle that is very addictive. And what that means is that if you had a parent who was abusive or somebody who was in your family that was abusive in any manner, shape, or form, what ended up happening is that typically in the cycle of abuse, there's a period where there's the honeymoon stage. And during the honeymoon stage, everything is great and calm and happy, and the person can be overly kind. But then the tension begins to build, and then bam, an incident happens where some sort of abuse happens. What trauma bond is actually a relationship of loyalty and love that is actually irrational towards a person who is abusive or causes us some sort of pain or harm. Dr. Patrick Carnes explains this really well of why we become addicted to those highs and those lows. And what he explains is that trauma bond actually also affects the way that our brain releases chemicals. When we are experiencing a high intensity relationship, we release chemicals such as adrenaline. And that adrenaline causes us to have a very high reaction. Now, when we come down from that adrenaline, typically in a relationship that is toxic, after some sort of disrespect or abuse or something unhealthy that your partner does, they will reward you or do some sort of kind act. Whether that means apologize and tell you that you're gonna change, or bring you flowers, or tell you that they love you and they didn't mean to do that, you end up believing that, and that is considered something like a reward, a positive reinforcement. And every time that we receive a reward, our brain releases a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is a pleasure reward chemical, so it makes us feel good. However, the dangerous thing about that is that dopamine comes more willingly when that reinforcement or reward comes randomly rather than consistently. So as you can see, this cycle becomes very, very addictive, and that is how people in toxic relationships, or the abusers in toxic relationships, keep the person in that relationship. Oftentimes, we ask ourselves the question, why don't people just leave? If the relationship is unhealthy and we can see that it's toxic and it's not helping the person, why do they stay? Well, because of that chemical reaction and because of trauma bond. Trauma bonding is really reinforced by the unhealthy relationship and also the fact that we grew up in an unhealthy attachment. And what ends up happening is that this is constantly reinforced through relationships. Signs of unhealthy or toxic relationships can begin to appear as early as in teenage years. In fact, 4 out of 10 teenagers report dating violence or being in unhealthy relationships with partners who are controlling, and they are controlling in a way that they don't want them to have guy friends, they don't want them to hang out with their girlfriends, and they expect them to drop everything just to be with them. They get upset if the partner doesn't let them check their phone, or if they're texting their friends, or if they're not giving them the attention that they feel they need. So part of that is that when we don't understand what are the signs of unhealthy relationships, it just continues to reinforce this trauma bond. So how can we prevent falling into an unhealthy or toxic relationship, or how do we get out of the relationship if we are in an unhealthy or toxic relationship? Well, the first step is actually getting informed. Being able to understand what is healthy and what is unhealthy is the biggest tool that we have, because when we understand that, then we know that we deserve something better, and we all deserve to have a relationship where we're loved, cared, and protected, and feel safe in. Now, it's also important to understand what are the red flags or traits of an unhealthy relationship. As we mentioned, poor communication, control, fear, insecurity, and criticism are just some of the unhealthy characteristics, but there are many more that a toxic or unhealthy relationship can have. Now, one of the things that I want to be mindful of is that if let's say that you have poor communication and feel that somewhat the roles in your relationship are a bit unequal, that doesn't mean that that is a toxic or unhealthy relationship if you are able to go to your partner and you are willing to actually work on it and follow through with actions on improving communication or improving some of those unhealthy patterns. If the person doesn't follow through and they just make empty promises, then that is an unhealthy and toxic relationship, and that is called manipulation, because they tell you what you want to hear but have no intention of actually following through with that promise. One of the other things that you can also do is take time away from that person. Dr. Patrick actually recommends that if you are in an unhealthy relationship and you're wanting to break it, to take time away from that person slowly, because he understands that just how the brain works and how you can become addicted to that high and low relationship, it can be very hard to detach yourself completely. So sometimes making space in little increments can be very helpful. He also recommends that if you are out of an unhealthy relationship or toxic relationship, that you give yourself time to heal and really develop an understanding of what are the expectations of what you want from a relationship. Because oftentimes when we jump from one relationship to the next, then we miss the opportunity to really grow and heal from the past hurtings that could have come from that relationship. Dr. Patrick actually recommends therapy because therapy can help the individual understand the red flags or unhealthy characteristics of the relationship if they are in an unhealthy relationship, or if you're coming out of a relationship, they can help you be able to understand where did these unhealthy attachments begin to develop in, whether they are in your childhood, in your teenage years, or as an adult. The most important thing to remember is that you are worthy. You are worthy of love, respect, support, and safety. You are worthy of having your needs and your desires met, and you are worthy of being loved in the way that you want to be loved. And that is important, my friend, because regardless of the attachment that you develop with your parents growing up, now that you are aware, you are able to develop something new for yourselves. So I encourage you, my friends, to try some of the tips that I discuss on how do we break from an unhealthy or toxic relationship and seek therapy if that is something that you feel would be beneficial. So I encourage you to take some of the steps that we talked about, and in whatever you do, I encourage you to continue on and carry on with valor. Thank you for watching my video, friends. I really appreciate your time. Please don't forget to comment, share, subscribe, and like. Also, if you want to learn more about some of the traits of unhealthy relationships or want to take a quiz on how healthy your relationship is, you can go to my website, which is valorstrengthofmind.com, and you are able to get that information under resources. Also, don't forget that you can follow me on Instagram at valorstrengthofmind, and don't forget that I'll be posting a video next Thursday at 6 o'clock, and we will be talking about how do we protect our inner peace and develop healthy boundaries with people around us. Thank you, my friends, and remember to carry on with valor.